I'm going to focus today on talking about the effects on local government, the challenges of local government of shale gas development. There are a variety of ways that the gas development affects local governments, creates challenges. You can see a list of kind of general infrastructure, types of services local governments provide, and all these things are affected one way or another, typically by gas development, oil and gas shale development. That local governments have to respond to. And just as a quick, easy example of that, this is the traffic patterns in Bradford County, which is Pennsylvania's largest or #1 gas drilling county in Pennsylvania. Number of green is the number of trucks, daily average. The number, the pink is the number of cars. Compared to 2010, it was before and after. 2010 was right about the peak of drilling activity in Bradford County. You can see, comparing particularly the truck traffic, that in the 4 different locations, typically at least a 10-fold increase, if not higher, depending on the location, the number of semi-trucks. So this very much has an impact on local governments, road maintenance and public safety and police services and a whole variety of things. And so, you know, the change, the impact is fairly dramatic. Big issues for them. I wanted to focus my talk today on 4 major elements that affect the local impacts. I think there are things critical to keep in the back of your mind when you think about how communities, when you think about how local governments understand and respond to, or are able to respond to this development that occurs in the community. And I'll go through and talk about each of these. The temporal aspect, the timing, scale, pace, really has a huge impact on when and to what extent activities occur, or the challenges that occur within the communities. What I have here is a breakdown of employment requirements for shale gas development. This is calculated by a study that was done out of the Marcellus Shale Education Training Center in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, where they interviewed gas companies to identify exactly what does it take from the very beginning to the end for a well pad, for a well to be able to complete it. And the big takeaways from this is to drill one well, it takes about 13 full-time jobs if you add it up over all the different individuals involved at various times. But once the well is drilled, it's only 19 jobs for every 100 wells. So that, you know, the production jobs, there are jobs there, but they're much smaller than in number than the drilling activity. And so the broad takeaway is, when you think about shale gas development, you think about oil development, that largely the employment impacts are during the drilling phase itself rather than in the long run. And what I have here is kind of a theoretical kind of example of over a period of time how the development phase jobs would appear within the community compared to the production phase jobs. And the key element, no one really knows the duration of how long the drilling will take in the community. The key element to take away is, as soon as the drilling activity starts to decline, the number of jobs dramatically decrease within the community. Again, long run economic benefit, there's still the production jobs, but they're much fewer number, much smaller number than during the drilling phase itself. And Pennsylvania communities have been having to struggle with this a little bit. This is the number of wells drilled a year in Pennsylvania, in 2 different regions of Pennsylvania. This is in the northern tier, which has predominantly dry gas. In other words, it's close to pipeline ready. But that's all that is the essential constituents in there. You can see that the drilling, with the exception of Susquehanna County, peaked in 2010, 2011, and then dropped fairly dramatically since then. And it's largely because of gas prices. In contrast to southwest Pennsylvania, this is south of Pittsburgh, is the area where there is wet gas, so it's the methane, but it also includes ethanes, butanes, propane, other additives that have economic value itself, and those are more profitable for companies with low gas prices to drill. And so you can see that within that, the gas drilling activity has increased, or is still increasing over time there. So even within one state, the length of time in which the activity is going on can vary fairly dramatically, which creates challenges for local governments to think about how do they plan for, how do they respond to those changes. Another aspect that I think is really critical to keep in the back of your mind is that the gas development is not simply the well pads by itself. The well pads are an important component of it, but there's all sorts of supporting infrastructure that provides the resources and the needs for that the drilling to go on in those well pads. Activity on a well pad might last only a couple months, but yet if a community is host to the sand storage facilities, the pipe yards, and the worker housing, the water withdrawal sites, the activity there can last for years, depending on how long the activity goes on within the area. What this means, though, is it creates challenges for local government officials because where the activity is going on varies over time, changing transportation patterns from the supporting sites to the well pads makes it difficult to plan and understand long run what's going to go. It also creates the challenges for communities that are both obviously near drilling, but also in a distance from drilling facilities. Particularly in Pennsylvania, a lot of the boroughs, which is where kind of being crossroads of roads, a lot of traffic going through those communities, even though they might not have any drilling going on directly within that community itself. And so when you think about impacts, you need to think broadly, not just community by community, but more what's the spatial pattern of this activity over a variety of the different communities being affected. Another aspect that I just feel a little careful, I try to be careful how I describe this, is the ability for local communities to be able to plan and respond, much less be proactive related to the activity. Many of the communities where the drilling activity is going on or where they're being affected by the drilling activities are very small rural communities, limited staffing, either part-time, elected officials, a part-time secretary, typically no managers, a municipal manager. There's really not anyone at the local government level or a few people who have the time and capability to add on all the significant planning and coordination communication issues that arise with this activity. I'm cautious about how I describe this is it's not that the local officials are not competent. They are very good at what they do. They're very competent. It's simply that they do not have enough time, in addition to what their existing responsibilities were, to be able to take on the additional things associated with this activity, and much less the ability for them to be able to hire and additional resources to do that. Whether or not there's new revenues really depends on state laws, and with Richard's presentation on wind energy, you already discussed that a little bit. There are some significant differences across states in how gas activity is handled. Texas, for example, mineral extraction the gas is subject to the local property taxes. So school districts, local governments there are getting a lot of money from that activity. It helps them be able to respond to the challenges arising from that. Pennsylvania, this activity is exempt from the local property tax. And so, the local laws, state laws affect whether or not there will be dollars coming in. Even in places where the dollars do come in, though, they might lag where the actual needs are. And so it might be a couple years out after the drilling is really picked up that the property tax revenues or impact fee revenues from the structure come in, might be after when they really need the dollars to be able to handle the things coming about. And then added on to that is because of the timing aspect and uncertainty about the future and kind of the boom bust cycle element, a lot of the investments that local officials need to make are related to infrastructure, roads, hiring individuals, new equipment, sewage systems, water systems, other kinds of things. Typically that kind of spending, or often the spending, requires some long-term commitments of time. It's not just a one-time fee, but it's rather a long-term commitment. And that commitment on infrastructure, there's significant risk for them to make those decisions on purchasing capital infrastructure because they don't know how long there's actually going to be a need for that, much less how long those new revenues will be coming in as a way to be able to cover those expenses. And the final issue, and I know this from experience, I've been involved in a lot of education with local government officials in Pennsylvania, is education is important. They need to understand how to deal with the situations, priorities, and so on. But that isn't enough. If it's a local government that does not have a lot of dedicated staff or a lot of time to be able to deal with the challenges and opportunities. Simply educating them is not going to really have much of a difference at all. And so I think it's really critical that we think more deeply of, okay, what kinds of support can we provide to local officials or local governments, whether it be at a regional level, whether it be circuit riders or other types of support. So it's not simply providing them information so they can do better, but what is it that we can provide to help them actually take advantage and put into place the things that they can do to that. So from a similar, Richard talked about context. I think the broader context is really critical to keep in mind as well too. A lot of it comes, in my mind, comes back to two major questions, and that's to what extent do the benefits return to the communities experiencing the activity, and that was something Richard noted as well with the wind energy. Are the jobs being created going to local residents? Are the tax revenues going back to the local level? Are the state and local taxes, where do those go? And then the second major question is to what extent the communities have the ability to make decisions. Do they have the right to regulate their zone, or use policy tools as a way to influence what happens in the community, or are they not able to do that? These choices essentially are answered in state and federal policies. We have an interesting mix across the states of how local taxation is done, likewise state taxation. If there's a severance tax at the state level, or state dollars coming in, to what extent are those dollars being put aside directly into a mineral trust fund, so those dollars are dedicated solely towards impacts and opportunities related to the oil and gas development. Wyoming, for example, has a mineral trust fund. North Dakota has a similar fund that is set up explicitly in a way to make it very difficult for the just on a whim for the dollars to be spent, but rather in a way to make sure that the decisions about the use of those dollars are very upfront and transparent and very carefully thought through. In contrast, are the tax revenues, do they simply go into the general fund and are spent statewide? Are those dollars sent back to the local communities where the dollars are being generated and where the activities going on? There's a range of things similar to that. Critical question at the local and state level is whether or not local jurisdictions can zone or otherwise regulate activity. There's depending on the state, if they to be felt going more statewide. And then, yes.
Can you just repeat what you
yes.
said? Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yes, the for state and state-owned land, to what extent the lease and royalty dollars going back to the communities where the impacts are being felt, versus are they going to the general fund or being used otherwise? Similar to the questions with state taxation. And then finally, kind of at the state level is broad monitoring and oversight. Who is monitoring what's going on? To what extent is it comparing or looking across multiple communities? And critically, what is it looking at? Is it environmental impacts? Is it social impacts? Is it community impacts? Is it the full range of things that are being monitored in some way or another to know what's going on? Federal level, it's very much similar issues where dollars go. One of the things I think is kind of interesting, anomaly, Pennsylvania has some federal forest land, and similar with other states, there's a stumpage fee on timber harvest in those federal forest land that comes back to the host communities. As far as I know, there is no similar kind of policy set up for releasing royalty dollars coming from federal land in for oil and gas development. And especially because a significant amount of the economic impact from gas development comes from the lease and royalty dollars, where those lease and royalty dollars are very critical to consider. And then lastly, federal monitoring oversight, similar to the state, is something that's really important to think about. My broad kind of final thoughts, kind of summarizing is, I don't use the phrase boom and bust here, but it is that dynamic. The economic impacts largely will occur only as long as the drilling occurs. So it's critical for local government officials and the citizens and others to view this as short-term stimulus for the economy rather than something that's going to be a long-run bedrock for the community. And so what that means is that, that to be thinking during the time of the boom, how are they using these dollars as a way to invest in other things in the community that help the community become stronger long run, rather than being focused solely on during the time of the oil and gas development. The timing element, it's also critical to keep in mind the risk for public investment. That makes it very difficult for local officials to make such decisions. Regionally, Richard used the phrase coordinate and planning. I think that's a key element of the needing to think regionally across communities rather than local government by local government. Because of the spatial nature of this activity, it's really essential that there be communication, coordination across all the communities within a region rather than one by one. Part of that, the focus is also finding ways to be able to increase the capacity for them to respond and work proactively, and whether that's done local government by local government at a regional level, kind of circuit right or other approaches is something that will be thought through, but it is something that is really critical. And then lastly, I think it's really important for there to be a consideration or thinking about understanding of how federal and state policies affect the ability of local governments to respond and what their opportunities are. Final slide is just a listing of, here, if you want to learn more, here are a variety of academic publications that are done, that have been done related to oil and gas development or kind of the impacts on local governments. So I guess I'm going to wait until after Roger talks, and then I'll be able to participate with the group and answer questions.